Hi, I'm Peter Hastings Falk, and I am the curator and editor-in-chief of the online art magazine called Discoveries in American Art. I was thrilled to be here today, thanks to Tony Fusco, founder of the Boston Design Week, who asked me if I wanted to give a talk that was really interesting and art-related for the crowd that's going to be attending the events. And he asked me what I'd like to talk about. And I said, just put on a wonderful exhibition with Robert Barry Gallery in New York called It's Time to Stick Together, 60 Years of Collage in America. And subject I've always been really pretty fond of and had the opportunity with Robert to do this. And Robert, we've known each other for quite a time. You might introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Robert Barry. I'm the founder of Robert Barry Gallery, based right here in New York. We've opened this year, right during these COVID times, and I've been presenting virtual exhibitions for the past few months. And I've known Peter for about 7, maybe 8 years now, and I wanted Peter to be one of the first guest curators at the gallery. So about 3.5 months ago, I asked Peter, what do you have cooking? What are some of the interesting shows you're working on, and what might be appropriate for Robert Barry Gallery? And Peter came to me and he said, I have a collage show, Robert. And I said, Peter, I'm very interested.
Right, and that's how it all started. So put together an exhibition of 21 artists. You'll see at Robert Barry Gallery. 2/3 of them are mid and late career artists. A third of them are deceased, and that's pretty much the balance that you'll see at discoveriesinamericanart.com, where we present a selection of the artists' works as well as their backstory. A third of the artists are women. 2 of the artists are of color, so it's increasingly a diverse exhibition, and so we're excited to put this together. And I think that collage has just simply been a subject that I've always been fond of, because it seems that every artist has maybe dabbled in it, but some have really excelled in it. So we wanted to go back in time and select those artists, and this is a range from the late 50s all the way to present day. So that's how I went in and delved in and went through the artists who've been reviewed by our curatorial board of a dozen art critics and historians, and Robert is also on our board, so it made sense that we work together in this really fun project, and I think you're going to find the images very intriguing.
Well, it's been very exciting preparing this exhibition, learning about all of the artists that you've presented to me with the project. I like that it's a diverse group, and I think there's a lot of amazing pieces that I think are going to be good for a lot of people's homes. So there's a lot of investment pieces, there's a lot of wonderful decorative pieces, and we have a great range from very affordable to very art historically important. So I guess the first thing that we should do, Peter, to tell everyone listening, is to really go back to the beginning of collage and really discuss where it's coming from, so we can set it into what's going on today, into the contemporary art world. So I guess the first thing, collage goes back to 200 BC in China. So maybe we should discuss briefly
That's a good point.
Those foundations.
Yep. This isn't going to be boring art history 101, we promise. But it is interesting to see where collage really came from. Robert, you know this.
Absolutely. Well, I guess it all really goes back to the history of papermaking in China. It was around 200 BC. And immediately, the artists, the scribes, and all of the scholars would start cutting things out and applying them to different scripts. And ultimately, collage was born, where it wasn't just a single piece of paper. You could layer, add different things, you could edit, you could reduce, and I guess it really puts it forward into the 20th century, where it was Picasso and Braque. After they ended the analytical cubism phase, they started using scraps of fabric, and it was the fake wood paneling at around 1912 when Brock made the first still life with, I think, the still life with fruit, and he combined that wood paneling, and that was really the paper collage, and that's really where the exhibition gets going, where the modern artist turning it into something as instead of painting and in addition to painting, and really creating something different and something special.
Exactly. And so taking it forward to today, the mission was, okay, who are those artists who are not slavish followers of Picasso and Braque and the others, but who took that vision and were very innovative and made it their own? So in our feeling as a curatorial board, the definition of quality, no matter what type of art you're looking at, is where does this stand on the historical timeline if you compare the work to the artist's more famous peers? How is this artist you're looking at really innovative and interesting? That's how that was the parameters for putting together this show. So there are people like, for example, Bud Holman, probably the earliest in the show, with collages from 59-60 that he created out in Hamptons and Sagaponack. And his best friends were Cy Twombly and Jasper Johns, and just a brilliant painter who's still at over 90 years old, living out in out west. Then there's Leo Jensen, who's the only American artist to have grown up in the circus. He was a performer, later became a rodeo rider. It's crazy, but he wound up in New York, and in the early 60s was one of the early pop artists. And he's the first artist to create kinetic pop art. And there's a wonderful collage in this show that shows how his friend Tom Wesselman appropriated from Jensen the Sighing Nude series that he did. There's another historically, I think, important artist is Wayne Emsrud, very, very expressive colorist who was clearly Kokoschka's only protege, and Kokoschka said so himself. He was his most important, very close to him. Or Tom McNeice, who was an outsider artist, lived in the swamps in Louisiana, and developed his own innovative collage technique with photography, and then later with acrylics.
Yes, and the combination of the two have made some pieces that the collectors are now loving, which I really like.
Yes.
Yes, one of the first conversations you and I ever had was that a lot of these artists that we're both looking for have been lost in time, lost in history, and overlooked from their more famous peers. So we realized that there's a lot of artists throughout the days and years that are doing better works that were overlooked for one reason or another. And it's ultimately what I'm trying to do with Robert Berry Gallery is really tell stories about some of these artists, whether they're 19 years old or 90 years old. So a lot of these artists that we've been working with, as you said, are vetted by the curatorial board, and there really are substantial stories to be told. So it's good work and great stories.
Exactly. And when people go to your website to see the exhibition, they'll see a synopsis of what the artist is all about. So people don't have a lot of time these days competing for screen time. You'll get the synopsis right there. But if you want the full story, then you can just click a link on Robert's website and go to Discoveries in American Art, read the whole backstory, which is, there are compelling human interest stories here that explain why these artists slip through the cracks, or why they haven't achieved the full recognition they deserve. There's a reason for it, and they're amazing stories.
Well, we have a lot of hard work to do to present some of these artists now into a new light. So you mentioned a few of our historical artists from the show, but we also discussed earlier in the program that we have a very diverse group of artists, including a lot of female artists and a few artists of color. So we're trying to include everybody and really dig through the cracks and really find all the artists across the board who have been lost. So I guess why don't we talk first about a few of the women artists including in the show?
Exactly. And Robert, part of my research in putting together the show was have a pretty strong leaning towards abstract expressionism, I really wanted to know who are the women of color today who are producing, have taken over the mantle of abstract expressionism, but taken it to another level. And I looked and I looked and I looked, and I could only find 2 or 3, and 2 of them were represented by major galleries. But one, Erica Renee, Ranee. Erica is, in my opinion, by far, at the very top of abstract expressionist women painting today. There's no question about it. But artists many artists are not self-promoting. And it's a different. It becomes a different world there.
Well, it's often why a lot of artists get lost in history, is because they just want to be in the studio making work, and they're less interested in the promoting and trying to get a gallery and the fancy parties. And those are the artists, and those are the ones that people really should be paying attention to. Collectors, museum curators, and especially other artists as well.
Yep. The other women, really interesting. Suzanne Benton. I mean, Suzanne is one of the leading feminist voices in America. Was one of the original founders of Now, but also an artist. And she balanced that the challenge of being a mother with creating her art. But she's been all over the world promoting women and teaching women as artists, and has just had hundreds and hundreds of exhibitions, and was really happy to have Suzanne's work represented. Beverly Brodsky, great example. She was Ad Reinhardt's #1 student in the 1960s. But it's difficult for women that period to get some traction in galleries. So things have changed a lot in the past 10 years.
Thankfully, they've changed.
Which is good, and we're hoping to be, and we are part of that change. A mid-career artist, Tani Roninger, who has taken the whole concept of collage and broken out with a completely new medium. So she's really our link from the analog to the digital world.
Absolutely.
Terrific.
Because her earlier work was more physical, but I could see where the collage inspiration came from in the progression of her work. Because I've actually known her work previous to the show for a few years, and have seen where it was 5 years ago, and the new works that she made specifically for It's Time to Stick Together. She really outdid herself and has really done something different with the graphite, and just completely turning collage and paper collage on its head, more or less. Yeah. And I really like what's coming on.
She's one of the brilliant forces, I think, today in gestural abstraction.
Yes.
Really important to take a look at her work.
And then I guess we also have another artist of color in the show as well.
Ed Welch. I visited Ed Welch down in North Carolina a number of times. He actually grew up as a little boy picking cotton, and his whole life story is written all over his approach to collage, and he has painted signs. They're sign portraits of famous African Americans throughout history, and the Janet Jackson one is the one that you have in the show. And
that's probably one of my favorite pieces in the entire show.
Yeah, he's really fun, and what a great guy, very earnest guy. And he unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But
and he started as a sign painter, I believe.
Exactly, in Harlem, he was a sign painter, and then he went off and he served in World War II in the European theater. Came back and started a sign company. But after he retired, he focused his artistic abilities on creating this series of historical portraits. So anyone important in history of blacks in America. It was really, really a great series. Okay. And they were exhibited at the Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore. It was a show, because again, he's an outsider, totally, self-taught.
And ahead of his time was the one thing I wanted to add.
Exactly. That's good.
He was doing things and taking chances that no one else was looking at, And now looking back at his early works, you see that a lot of artists were inspired by it and just kind of took and took and took and took. And now we realize that he was among the first to be doing some of these different assemblages.
Exactly. Yep.
And then I guess in the exhibition, we also have a few more traditional collage artists that really looking back at the earlier works. So I guess who would stand out from the more traditionalists from there?
Yes, when we talk about traditional collage, we go back to the origin of the word collage, which comes from the French verb coller, which means to stick together, which is how we got the title of the show. So usually what it is really, cutting out of magazine pictures and or photographs and reassembling them, and it's fun. And it can be fun, and it can be an exercise that, well, the work is just fun. It's not really that great. So we really, with all these collages, had to focus on what was really standing out. And one of them, for a late career artist, is Paul Forte, who created a very large, extraordinary collage that must have taken him months and months and months to produce. And it from a distance looks like an abstract painting. There's Rex Ashlock, who was in New York from the late 50s through the 80s, living in the Village, and his collage is made of Lucky Strike cigarette packages, but at the center, instead of the Lucky Strike symbol, there's anatomical parts of women in the Lucky Strike, and so there's a whole.
Well, it's right out of Mad Men now, which is kind of very appropriate.
Yes, it is. Don Zanfagna is a name that people might not know. He's probably the best known, the least known visionary artist, who might be the most important. And he was a good friend of Buckminster Fuller, who considered him a genius. And he anticipated a lot of the issues we have today with the environmental issues, and various social issues, and technology and cyborgs and all that. And crazy series to see. And the other one is really, Jeffrey Moss.
Who is actually behind you.
Who's
the yellow and blue painting. I've been looking at that the whole channel.
Well, Jeffrey was nominated twice for a Pulitzer Prize for his political drawings in the Washington Post. Dan Rather wrote a foreword to the book about his political cartoons. So that was how he was really known. But what people don't know is that was his job by day. By night, he was painting like a madman.
And living that dual life.
Yeah, crazy. Just incredible. And historically, also you've got Harry Birchman, same way. Harry Birchman was an abstract painter who, by day, he was a commercial graphic design artist. You can walk into any CVS and you'll see at least a dozen or more products. Those packages, whether it's Bufferin or Advil or whatever, he designed them. But by night, he painted like a maniac. And it's just like walking into a studio. It was like walking into a time capsule that's been preserved for over 60 years. Prolific, extraordinary. And so those are the kinds of artists that we are really interested in, because the quality of the work is there, but this incredible backstory is there to explain why we haven't heard more about them. So that's all part of our whole mission, that we share. And so in the end, I think people, when you're collecting art, is you have a visceral reaction, but then at the same time you say, well, why does this matter? So
it's important.
Yeah, why are we even here looking at this? Why are you and I even discussing this? Because we feel that it really matters. And it's not about, making art sales as much as it is enriching people's lives. And if people have that visceral reaction to the art and they really get it when they read the story, then it should be something that they would want to live with to enhance their own lives, owning something that pays, well, psychological dividends every time they see it.
Absolutely. Well, what I tell everyone I speak to, whether it's a long-time established collector or someone making their first art purchase, is I tell them to buy what they love and you'll never go wrong. Or
Good.
you need that emotional response to a work, regardless of the price, the value, the history, because you need to love it. It's going to be something that you're living with for 30, 40, 50 years, and it really needs to mean something to you. And this is going to be something that you're going to pass down to your children, possible future investment for other acquisitions, and it's people need to ultimately enjoy what they're collecting. So I think we've done a pretty good job coming up with this group of artists. So overall, I would say, what were the most difficult challenges in the curation for this show, given the fact that we're doing virtual exhibitions during COVID and everything else going on in the world politically? What were some of the bigger challenges?
Oh, wow. I tried to, I mean, it's one of the reasons politically, it's one of the reasons why I looked at Erica Renee does have hidden messages in her paintings in terms of, what inspired them, which is amazing. But just looking at the works themselves and trying to focus on, I guess, really just the impact that the work visually had upon me. Call it aesthetic ecstasy. But what was it that moved me there? So I guess it might be a more traditionalist point of view. Even though some of these works do contain text, and I think textual art can be interesting. I think it's very difficult to pull it off, but with collage, it seems to work, easier as well.
Well, there's text. There's some political works in the show. There's some risque works in the show, and it seems to be a very good mix where it's covering a lot of topics, a lot of bases, and it's all being stuck together by the theme of collage.
Exactly, and it truly covers 60 years. So, that's exciting. It's fun. Actually, yeah, 60 years.
Yeah, 60 years. And I guess if you would tell anyone listening, what is the overall message behind your curated show? It's time to stick together.
Besides the title of the show itself, I think we think that everyone should stick together in these times. But I think it's really think out of the box, and often some very, very good artists have experimented in collage, but we haven't seen what that is. I think it's a wonderful niche to collect in. So if someone was starting off in terms of collecting by a medium category, this would be a really fun one to get into, because you can cover all the way from decoupage from the late 19th century on pieces of furniture and vases and things, to all the different ways that fragments of our culture have been embedded into artwork. I think is really it's a topic that's really quite different, and I think it's fun and challenging.
Well, it's also we also have a lot of very fair price points for new collectors with some of these works, so they're also a very good starting point for collectors to get interested in buying art. So usually, typically, an oil on canvas work is going to be a lot more than a piece on paper, where a traditional drawing is going to be a flat surface, where the collage, it's actually doing something a little different. There's more going on, and often the artists put a little more care into the collage pieces.
Yes. There's some real, truly there are some real bargains on it. I'm saying that as an appraiser as well.
And I guess the last question that I have for you is, so where do we end up with this art world as we're doing a virtual panel discussion for Design Week? Where is this art world going to take us during COVID and during the post-COVID days, with viewing rooms, online exhibitions, virtual Sotheby's and Christie's auctions? So what do you think?
Well, I think it's going to take us to where we are right now. And that is, there's going to be a lot more communication via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
That's how collectors are going to get their first look. They're going to go to virtual exhibitions like yours. They're going to see what the works actually look like, hanging on the wall, so that gives them a better idea.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be able to see it because I know that you go out of your way to place works in an actual room, in the person's own room. They send you a picture, you put it in their room,
Absolutely.
and see what it looks like. Ultimately, we also understand and appreciate the fact that to make a final decision, sometimes people have to see it in the flesh, and so we arrange for that too. Galleries will as they are now, go on a basis where maybe 6, 7 people at a time might be allowed in the gallery.
So I guess given current times, it's dealers like myself are using new technologies, new means, new ways, where I'm able to have a show curated and presented at the gallery where collectors can see what the works look like, compare and contrast. We can even, as you mentioned, install works in people's home digitally. And we can do things like the viewing, shipping on approval. It's taking advantage of everything that we have and everything that we don't right now. So as a dealer, it's the business ways are changing, and it's kind of exciting because there's
and the digital technology is going to be improving all the time, including the 3-dimensional ability. I know you have a show coming up also at the Art Hamptons, and that's accessible in a 3D space. So that's really kind of fun. You have some of the collages in that show as well.
Harry Birchman. And Tanny Roniger.
Yes. So, that's just the way we adapt. The one thing that's consistent is the fact is that people who are seriously interested in art, who want to smell the roses, who want to live with the roses, they're always going to be, wanting to own them and to, well, like I said, live with them, enjoy them, and so we're removing all the barriers to that by doing things like sending works on approval and by appointment, viewing.
Zoom studio visits I've done recently. The online art fairs have now happened. As you mentioned, I'm doing the Hamptons Fair, and Aspen Fair just happened, and all of the new technologies with these, it's getting more and more like walking through a fair or walking through a gallery where collectors who don't really have a lot of time can make and see a lot more works right there from their couch instead of having to fly to Venice or go to Miami. They can see the fair right from their couch, on their cell phone even, and it's kind of exciting.
Exactly. It is.
And I guess the one thing we learned the other day with one of the artist studio visit is that a lot of the artists actually like this, where they don't have to leave the studio. They can just keep working and working and no longer have to make excuses to leave because they don't want to go to a dinner. They just want to stay making work.
Exactly. And the other effect, Robert, of this pandemic is that it's leveled the playing field among all dealers in art, whether it's a big, famous brick and mortar gallery, or whether it's a private dealer, or whether it's a broker advisor type. If you have the eye for quality and you can put together a good show or represent, an artist you feel is significant, you can make a strong. They're all making their case in the same medium, which is online through virtual exhibitions.
It's no longer dependent on just the brick and mortar space in Chelsea or in the Upper East. It's that there's a greater equality and that everyone gets their voice, including artists, younger dealers, advisors. It's now looking for the best works and also getting very good values right now as well, which is very exciting. As myself, as a collector, I've made quite a few acquisitions in the past few months. And the time is now.
Yep. And it's all about, you're talking about younger dealers and others, they can bring it forward. It's just, when you're looking, if you feel that it's important, you've got to do your homework. It does go back to education to see, to learn more about what you're really buying. And also to, the only advice I give is avoid the hype and fluff, deal with authenticity and verify that, what you're reading about is really the real deal. And,
Absolutely.
and you really understand why it's different, why it's innovative, because that's going to be of lasting significance for you and lasting value.
Excellent. Well, I guess to wrap things up, if anyone listening wants to see more of the works, you can go to robertberrygallery.com to see It's Time to Stick Together, 60 Years of American Art. And to learn more about the artists in the exhibition, you can go to discoveriesinamericanart.com to really learn the backstories on each of these artists. And just want to say, Peter, it was an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed it.
Thanks, Robert. Everyone, have fun.